The Fourth Period.com presents the O&B Puckcast, episode number 66. As the Flyers are humming along since the All-Star break, I'm your host, Isaiah.
Dan the Flyer fan.
Anthony DeMarco.
Chef B.
All right, we're ready to roll. Well, gents, the Flyers have come out of the All-Star break, getting 5 out of a possible 6 points. We can't complain. 2-0-1. You really can't ask for much better, given the fact they had to play Pittsburgh and Colorado on consecutive nights, and Pittsburgh on the road, and then come back in the real trap game last night with Detroit, and the Flyers passed that test. And we'll talk about that, and for the listeners a little bit later. I'm going to go one-on-one with Anthony Mingioni from Center Ice Philly Magazine and Off the Post podcast, and he has some thoughts about selected Flyers prospects, players that particularly intrigued me, and of course he'll get into what he thinks the possibilities are with the Flyers in terms of the trade deadline and their playoff push. So let's start with you, Chef. You have not been with us for a couple weeks. Coming out of this All-Star break, coming off that Pittsburgh game in Philly, the Flyers really did a great job winning that game, getting a shutout. So they go into Pittsburgh. They kind of outplay the Penguins, but they had like a 12 or 13-minute stretch there where the game got out of control before the Flyers could come back. What were you thinking watching that game?
I was thinking they started off good. They let it get away. I thought it was going to be one of those games where you sit there like, you know what, you could have solidified that you're actually a playoff team by playing a little bit better than I did, and more consistent, I should say. You know, I have to say they came back, went to OT, and they got snuffed in OT pretty fast by Crosby of all people. But otherwise, I mean, it was okay to come back after having so much time off. But of course, it depends, and you wanted it to be more than that.
Yeah, there's no question, especially the night when I thought about 3/4 of the game, the Flyers outplayed them, except for that aforementioned stretch. I think, Anthony, when you look at it, there was a key moment in that game, and I'm not going to bag on Brian Elliott, but there was that one goal that even AV mentioned as one he'd like to have back that kind of turned the tide a little.
You're talking about the third goal in the Penguins game Friday?
Yeah, Letang goal.
Yeah, that one was bad. Brian Elliott wasn't that great in that game, and I can't really hold it against him because he's been brilliant in his 3 other outings since. He's been really playing above his head, at least in my mind. But that game as a whole, I didn't really feel like he was really too sharp. That was a brutal goal. He was clearly cheating, thinking there was going to be a cross-crease pass for the one-timer on the other side. Yeah. But, I mean, even there were some times last night, where he was just flying around the crease, losing his net. Obviously, that save that Pitlick made. But, I mean, it definitely was a changing point in that game. And the Flyers probably should have won that game and would have won that game had Elliott been playing better than he had.
Yeah, let's not be too hard on him. As Jordan Hall informs us, since Carter Hart went down, Brian Elliott is 4-0-1 with a 1.58 goals against average. So, I mean, we'll talk more about some of his successes in the ensuing games. But Dan, the next night they come back against the Avalanche, and I consider them a Stanley Cup contender, especially in what's not such a great Western Conference outside of about 2 or 3 teams. And they get the job done. They win a very exciting game where maybe the Avalanche even outplayed the Flyers on the whole, but the Flyers come out victorious, winning that game 6-3.
Yeah, and Alex Line was in net, and he didn't allow 17 goals. So that's plus as is. Kevin Hayes has been looking great in that game. Joel Farabee had 2 goals in that game as well. It was about all you can ask from the Flyers facing a team like that with a ECHL goaltender in your net. So that's about all you can ask. It was a great game. I believe it was the first shorthanded goal there for Kevin Hayes, and then he had one against the Red Wings last night. So overall, they looked good. And, they didn't get blown out of the water. Remember the last time they played the Avalanche in Colorado, no matter how good the Flyers were, the Avalanche were just a step above them.
Yeah.
And you really didn't see that this time. The Flyers definitely stood strong and played well. So much better than the last outing against Colorado, and all things considered, a very good, strong game. Yeah,
it really was. Alex Lyon, for me, was the star of the night. I mean, he came up really big early in the game when the Flyers are kind of getting their sea legs, and then late in the game, he held the fort. I mean, he actually looked like an NHL goaltender, at least for that night. And none of the 3 Av goals are really on him. Both Hayes and Farabee, we'll talk about him in a minute, had 2 goals each. Couturier playing a really good game after a bit of a subpar game, including that turnover to Crosby in OT the night before. He had 3 assists, and back-to-back, Ivan Provorov, 27 minutes. And I think in both games he played close to that amount. So really just a big game the Flyers had to win. That's one of those victories, Chef, we're going to look back at maybe at some point, especially if the Flyers make the playoffs, we'll say that was really a key game. They had to nail down 2 points after losing to Pittsburgh the night before.
Oh, definitely. And know what I thought was, I might be jumping the gun here, but Detroit's game last night, you go back a week or 2 ago, and the Montreal game was definitely laid up as a trap game. I mean, Dan called it big time before the game even started. And, worried about this one. Going into last night's game, I was a little less worried. I mean, just the way that they've been playing, that there wasn't going to be a trap game. I was hoping, and I saw a strong outing, somewhat, for the most part, I should say, and I was happy about that. I just think that if they don't, in order for this team to show us that they're not going to be that fringe team, that borderline team, they have to win the must-win games. And a couple times, 3 or 4 times this season already now, we've seen that they haven't done that. So that, to me, that was a turning point last night. Like, okay, you need to go in, you need to win this game, and you need to win it decisively, and they did. And that, to me, that's more of a turning point than the Avs game.
Yeah, well, that there's something to be said for that, because as you referred to that Montreal game, that was a disappointing game for them, and they definitely had a letdown. But if you think about it, since that horrible West Coast trip that ended up with them going to Carolina, losing that game in overtime, the Flyers are 7-1, and they have defeated. Let me see. They beat Boston, the Caps, St. Louis, also the Avs, and of course Pittsburgh. So, and one of their losses was to Tampa Bay, who's been really streaking, or had been streaking up to that point. And that was a very close, hard-fought game up to the end. Yeah. So the Flyers are playing like a team, Anthony, that is doing some really important things. And that brings us to last night when they blanked Detroit. And they were efficient, machine-like. Their coverages were good. Their neutral zone play was good, and this has been the hallmark of their play in that period of time I just referred to.
Yeah, it's been on the backs of strong defensive play, because we just mentioned you had games with Brian Elliott not being at his best, and now Alex Lyon, even when he played well against Colorado, he isn't anything to write home about. And obviously last night's against an inferior opponent like Detroit, but the Flyers are winning games that you need to win in the playoffs. And I know maybe that's a premature statement, but you're not going to run and gun in most games in the playoffs, especially if you get beyond the first round. You have to be able to lock it down. And what was the problem with the Flyers in all the years under Dave Haxtell They would get out to these high-end leads, and they could not hold on to them for any stretch. And you see the pieces that Chuck Fletcher brought in this summer have all, like, directly improve that area. Matt Niskanen playing with Ivan Provorov in crunch parts of the game. Justin Braun playing somewhat in that role, especially on the defense, but also taking away hard minutes so a guy like Travis Sanheim could be fresh for those. What more can you say about Kevin Hayes aside from Sean Couturier? He's been the most valuable forward to this team, especially in defending leads and killing penalties. So I just think it's an area that the Flyers have not been good at, and were not good at for the entire regime under the Hackstall and Hextall era. And now this year, they're finding a way to win games, and it's especially important when you consider that they don't have consistent offense from one guy every single night.
No, they don't. They've had some losses in personnel that we've talked about, of course, with Lindblom and Patrick. And Dan, the thing is, with a team that looked to reduce goals against as their primary method of getting into the playoffs and making acquisitions, to bring that into being, all these things right now, as it stands, are coming to fruition. And before we go into the standings, I just wanted to get your thought. As we get her in tonight, the Flyers are in the playoffs, and that appears to be how they're going to be able to ride this thing in.
Yeah, I mean, like Anthony was saying, they just got to lock it down. And the overall defensive ability from the team has been much better lately. Especially nice to see guys, like Tyler Pitlick joining the cause and really building his own case there. The defense has looked good more often than not lately. The goaltending, even in Hart's absence, has been able to hold it down. Hopefully Hart comes back soon and he can pick up where he left off. The home version of Carter Hart anyway, where he's, essentially unstoppable. And, that's what you want to see out of him. And that's what they're going to need here down the stretch. We talked about it on Brotherly Pod. We kind of joked, they got to win every game from here on out. But, they really kind of do, at least as many as possible. There's not many points from here on out they can give up. So, and locking it down defensively is the first way to do that.
Yep, you caught me drinking. Yeah. The thing is, if you look at the standings, and I included that in our wrap-up for tonight, and you just assume, and I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that a team like the Rangers and Buffalo aren't going to be able to cut it, and you look at the playoff chase, and the Flyers have the first wild card spot as we record on Tuesday night here, with 65 points. The Islanders are holding the second wild card spot, and it seems unbelievable, Chef, that Carolina and Toronto are on the outside looking in. But we all know this is going to change almost every night.
Oh, yeah. Especially, considering the whole latter half of the schedule for the Flyers now, they're going to be facing a lot of these teams. And a lot of these teams, I kind of like the fact that the back end of the schedule seems to be more laden to teams in your own division and conference. I think it makes it more interesting down the stretch, but also makes it more difficult too. We're going to see I think the Jackets 2 more times, Rangers 2 more times at least. So it's going to be a fun little stretch down here. You can't just take these teams for granted. They've been a thorn in your side now for the last 2 years. And, especially what did I say at the beginning of when we did our preview of the season coming up on Thursday? The Devils were not going to be anything to talk about this year. They weren't going to be very good. But they've always seemed to be a pain in the ass for the Flyers. And that's another trap game coming up where you got to win this. And you can't give away points. You can't give away these points.
Well, it is another Detroit type of game or Montreal type game, but except that New Jersey's probably like the second or third worst team in the league. They just can't lose this game, especially at home. Anthony, you look at these teams and you say to yourself, okay, if there's 10 teams that really have a shot in the Eastern Conference, and you take a look at who's streaking, like Columbus, they're 8-1-1 in their last 10, okay? And, Florida, 8-2 in their last 10. versus teams like the Islanders that are 4-3-3. They've had some controversy with Barzal on the bench, blowing that big lead against the Capitals a couple weeks ago. Toronto, they lose Frederick Anderson with what they say is a neck problem. Could it be a concussion? They're only 4-4-2. So who is going to survive the cut based on, your vantage point from here? Who's going to drop out? Who's playing above their heads? And maybe who's going to sneak back in this thing?
Well, right off the bat, if Frederick Anderson is out for any extended amount of time, the Leafs are dead in the water. That team relies on Frederick Anderson so much, it's almost criminal how much they ride him to the ground. And he hasn't been that great in the last month or so, but he is their ace in the hole. And it's weird to say when you consider, Marner making $10 million and Tavares and Matthews making 11 plus and Nylander. But, especially when you consider that Morgan Riley, their best defenseman on a relatively thin blue line, has been injured and will be injured for at least another month.
Yeah. You
lump in Anderson, that could get ugly real quick. Aside from that, I really don't think that the Columbus Blue Jackets will be able to maintain this. But at the end of the day, I think they probably will squeak in. I think the Flyers will get in because just save for that 5-game stretch out west, they've been really just on a complete roll since the beginning of November, and we'll know much more then. So I expect them to get in. So I think Toronto may miss because of this recent injury. And one of Carolina or the New York Islanders, if I had to guess, I'd probably say the Carolina Hurricanes because of the uncertainty between the pipes.
Yeah, that and the fact that Dougie Hamilton's out.
Yeah, sure,
probably until the last week of the regular season or something like that. So yeah, that's a possibility. Dan, it's kind of like the same question, and I guess the other question is, do you believe that Carolina can overcome that goaltending? James Reimer is it. It's not Mrazek this year. Reimer's the guy with the better numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Hurricanes and Islanders both have been teams that have essentially relied a whole lot on goaltending, last season when they made the playoffs and then this season as well. And they're not showing up as often. And the Flyers have passed them both. And I don't know. I mean, if you ask me if Reimer is a guy that's going to carry this team to glory, probably not. But they almost did it with Mrazek last year, so I guess anything is possible. But I'm not overly threatened by them at the moment. But, it's possible. We've seen them work magic before, catch, lightning in a bottle once before. So I don't think so, but I can't say that with any kind of legitimate certainty either.
Yeah. And, let's not underestimate Anthony, I'll go back to you on this because you might know this guy a little better. The effect of the loss of Adam Pelech for the Islanders. Now, there's a good defenseman, and he's a real important part of their defensive structure. And, because outside of Matthew Barzal, they don't have a lot of big names, and, it's not like they're knocking it dead in goals for. They're only a +10 differential.
Well, they are the epitome of a do-it-by-committee team. They have Matthew Barzal and a bunch of blue-collar workers. Like, obviously, you have Jordan Eberle in there and Brock Nelson, who provides a good presence at the 2C. But even their captain, Anders Lee, really, physical guy. And a lot relies on their bottom six when you have Matt Martin and Casey Cizikias and Komarov and Clutterbuck. And I just think with the Islanders is that if you can get beyond the Barzal and Eberle Lee line, they are just kind of thin in terms of raw offense. And then obviously they've made their MO under Barry Trotz as a defensive unit, but as a whole. And you can't really single out one defenseman on that blue line that really comes off the page. Like, they have some young, promising guys, especially Noah Dobson and Devon Taves look good, but Laddie and Pollock and Boychuk and Mayfield, they all kind of do it by committee. So you're right, when one of those guys goes down like Pelech does, it may not seem like a big loss, but because of the way they play as a unit and a cohesive unit. Every single piece really means something integral, and you've kind of seen it now with their recent slide.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that comes up when I look at the a team like Florida, now they've been able to get this done without Bob for the most part. Now Bob is back. Statistically, Chef, he's not had a good year, and so far he's played 39 games, 37 games started. He's .898 save percentage, 3.25 goals against, and they're getting as much mileage out of this Chris Driedger guy as they were out of Montalban or whoever else they were sticking in goal. I mean, they're getting by with their forward, their scoring, guys like Huberdeau and Barkov and Hoffman. I mean, that's, how they were getting it done, but they're going to need Bob coming down the home stretch.
Yeah, but you got to wonder what kind of Bob you're going to get at the end of this season here. I mean, he hasn't been all that great since he went down to Florida. Maybe it's too much sun or whatever, those beaches. But I don't know. I don't see him coming back all that strong. So I don't know what they're going to do down there. They're going to be one to watch. If you were talking about teams that could fade out of it, it could be them. I mean, they're riding hot right now, like you said, but they could be one of the ones that falter.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, did you watch that game versus the Maple Leafs with Florida in Chance game?
I watched the highlights. I know, I just watched the condensed video package of it, and right. I listened to the breakdown of it.
Yeah, I heard Bob made some clutch saves in that game, so it offered them some hope, if you will.
Yeah, but he's still allowed a 3 spot, which isn't bad, but on a team like Florida, they can usually get to 4 or 5 because they have such a high octane offense. The thing with the Florida Panthers is to your point, they paid Bob that kind of money to erase a lot of the defensive mistakes. And, that blue line, they have some top-heavy guys with Ekblad and Yandel and Strawman, and then you get to Mike Matheson, and he's been a bit inconsistent. Then it drops off a cliff, and you start getting into the Mackenzie Wiegers and the Mark Pisicks, and I think the kid's name is Stillmans of the world. Right. And that's when it gets shady. And then you have Bob, who's struggling to keep a save percentage above 900, and it just completely defeats the whole purpose of how this team was constructed. They probably won that game because Michael Hutchinson was absolutely brutal and lose it. Yeah. And lose it if Anderson doesn't go down with an injury.
You know what's a killer is Bob's got a no-move clause. And they have their top prospect in goal.
Spencer Knight.
Right, Spencer Knight. Dan, you could talk to that. I mean, this is like Paul Holmgren-like planning to give that kind of term and cap hit to Bob. It just seems, I know they're really desperate and they made a lot of promises to Q, but man, that's just killer.
Yeah, not entirely sure what they were thinking with this one. The thing with Bobrovsky was, I wrote an article about a year ago, about him potentially coming back to Philadelphia and how it would be the same thing it was when he left. They'd be invested in Carter Hart and Bobrovsky would be the kind of backup, and it wouldn't be the perfect situation. And they kind of did the same thing. I believe they signed Bobrovsky after they drafted Spencer Knight on a technicality by a couple weeks there as the draft versus the free agency. But, overall, it's still one of those things where, you draft essentially a home run like Spencer Knight, and all of a sudden you're, got Bobrovsky for the next 7 years at a huge cap hit. So I don't know what they're thinking there. I mean, I do like Sergei Bobrovsky. I hope he can refine his game. Just not this season for the Flyers' sake. But, I don't know. I don't know what their long-term goal is here on that one.
Yeah, Anthony, I'm almost thinking like there's a wink and a nod. Yeah, we're going to pay you, and we're going to pay you more than anybody else is going to pay you. But when it's time to clear out, let's come to an accommodation. Sergei wants to go back to Russia. or like almost like a Kovalchuk situation. I doesn't make any sense whatsoever to be locked into a guy that long for that much money in today's day and age.
Well, look, it doesn't make sense, especially for all the points that Dan just outlined. You technically signed him less than a week after you drafted the best goaltending prospect since Carter Hart, and you could even make the case that Knight has more hype coming out of the U.S. development program.
Right.
But the way I look at it is the last few seasons, the Florida Panthers missed the playoffs because of horrible goaltending. And even in a best-case scenario, Spencer Knight is 2 years away, if not longer, from reaching the NHL and realizing his full potential. And are they really prepared to waste the best years of Aaron Ekblad and Jonathan Huberdeau and Sasha Barkov and Vincent Trocheck and trying to sell that to an ownership group that has been taking loss after loss after loss? So from a pure hockey perspective, it's tough to view it from the cap angle, and you drafted Spencer Knight. But I do understand it from, we saw it here in Philadelphia. You wait for Carter Hart to show up, and you try and bridge the gap with an Elliott and Neuwirth and a Mason. But then by the time the kid shows up between the pipes, your superstars are no longer superstars. I think it would have been smarter to maybe go 5 years at $6 million with a Robin Lehner. I think that would have been way better, kind of like a similar type contract that Dallas did with Bishop.
Yeah.
But I do understand the thought process that you have to maximize the prime years of your superstars.
Yeah, they definitely agree with that. So this show is making a concession that Washington, Pittsburgh, and Boston, and probably Tampa Bay are going to make it. I always thought Tampa was going to make it. I always thought Toronto was going to make it, but some of the injuries they have on defense, and if Anderson's hurt at all, you have to wonder how desperate they're going to be to make a trade deadline move. And yet, on a TSN or a Sportsnet, I forget where's Brian Burke these days? I think he's on Sportsnet. Yeah.
Sportsnet.
And he thinks the trade deadline is going to be a dud. I think there's a lot of teams that have a lot vested in making it, and I think it's possible there could be some hockey trades, or if not three-way trades that kind of like are three-way, because not making the playoffs after firing Babcock and making the changes that Toronto did, Chef, to me, that just seems like an unacceptable outcome.
Yeah, well, it's put up or shut up. I don't even know what to say. It's kind of like I'm at a loss.
Yeah, well, you're just overwhelmed by the thought. I can tell. So yeah. So I also see 911 emergency on the island. They have cap space. In Columbus, they're not going to go all in like they did last year, Dan, because they can't do that again. I could see them adding a player. They got $6.5 million in cap space, so that's not outside the realm of possibility.
They're a team with nothing to lose, is what they are.
Right.
They came into this season losing, Bobrovsky and Panarin, and everybody expected them to be bottom of the Metro. And, they've done so much more than that. And the fact that there's, 30 games left in the season and they're thoroughly in a playoff spot at this point. I mean, it's just gravy, whatever they do here. So I don't know. Maybe they'll be a little more reckless and say, screw it, and go out there and make a couple moves and try and make something out of this season and really defy expectations. But at the same time, if they just kind of sit back and say, nah, this is all gravy at this point, that wouldn't surprise me either. So I definitely think they're the wild card team in all this in terms of the trade deadline and what they're really planning on doing.
Yeah, especially with that cap space. Just one other thing about last night's game against the Red Wings. I didn't want to sell AV short. I thought it was great, Anthony, that AV took the opportunity to really give some of his players a break. Spread out the ice time, no 27 minutes like he had almost back-to-back with Provorov, who got 22 and change or something like that. And especially in a game where we were worried the Flyers could fall down. I think that was, to me, an under-the-radar positive.
Yeah, no, it was good on AV, and you have to take these kind of games to rest your players when you have the luxury to do so. Like you mentioned, it's being almost standard right now that when the Flyers go up against top-tier opponents, Ivan Provorov is, in between 25 and 30 minutes, and Matt Niskanen is hovering around 24, 25. And then you see Sanheim around 22, and then it kind of drops off after that. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Robert Haig and Justin Braun have played very well together at an almost unsustainable rate, as Charlie O'Connor pointed out today. I found they have been excellent. I find that Sanheim and Myers have been playing better. They were slowly finding their game approaching the All-Star break, but they were still having a lot of high risk, high danger, kind of chance, or high risk, high reward types of plays.
Right.
I find the risk has gone down a lot. Myers still kind of, gets lost sometimes, but I think coupled with the fact that the Flyers played a weak opponent yesterday and the depth of defense playing better, it was really important for AV to take the opportunity and jump on it and rest his top guys.
Dan, just before we're going to analyze quickly the Flyers' remaining schedule, and then we'll get out of here, and I'll go one-on-one with Anthony Mingioni. The Professional Hockey Writers Association came out with, I guess, their half-season awards, and most notable among those awards was a Selke voting, where Sean Couturier is in the lead, and I thought to myself, well, what if he doesn't win? Are they going to give him like a little mini-me trophy for like a half season?
You almost won this award trophy? Yeah. I don't know what I don't know. I think it's interesting that he's top one. I believe at the All-Star break, Patrice Bergeron and Ryan O'Reilly were all relatively similar in points. They were all around the 43 mark. You broke it down on Bradley Pod. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but it was all relatively similar. It's good to see that he's getting the recognition. This has been, kind of on the borderline elite mark for a couple of years now. So it's good to see him getting that. But yeah, these midseason awards, I guess, don't mean a whole lot if at the end of the day, he doesn't win. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Yeah,
it's kind of silly. But to me, I mean, why have a half-season award if you don't win? I don't know. I think
participation trophy.
Yeah.
Error. That's why.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the
everybody needs to get some kind of recognition for something, and you feel like that you're at the stage now. If you don't feel like you say that somebody's great, or if you don't agree with somebody being elite anymore, like Anthony had to put up with all week and all day on Twitter, then you feel like it's going to be a big argument. So you kind of. So this is the way caving in a little bit, I think, to the masses out there to say, hey, here, look, we're going to give. We don't think even if he doesn't win, at least we acknowledge the fact that he was up there to keep some people quiet.
Oh, so it kind of lets a little air out of the balloon.
Exactly.
I never thought of that about it from that angle. I guess that's an interesting theory, and Gigi obviously agrees. So, yeah, okay, so, Jens, let's move along for that little sideline. The Flyers have 29 games left. They have 15 home, yay, and 14 away. And looking at what's coming up, they play this Thursday against the Devils, and then it gets really rough. They play at Washington on Saturday. Then they have a back-to-back Monday, Tuesday. They play They play Florida at home, then they take a train or whatever, or a bus to the island, and then they take that wonderful trip, Dan, the one that I have grown to hate, the Florida trip, where they have to play the Panthers and then the Lightning, and they're lucky if they come home with 1 point.
Yeah, these have not gone well in recent years, and considering how much these games are going to mean, it is a little worrisome. I hope that they can go down there and put up a fight. I mean, if they play the way they have been over the last, 3-4 weeks, maybe they stand a chance. But, these are two very good teams in their own right. So, I don't know. It worries me. And there was the whole, next 2 weeks worry me. The two Florida games, Islanders, Columbus twice. There's a whole lot at stake here. And like I said, these are all pretty much must-win games at this point.
Yeah, because after that, after the Tampa game on the 15th, we'll come back and talk to you about that whole cluster of games. We're also going to have some other people from thefourthperiod.com with us. So it's going to be our trade deadline special. But after putting that aside, on the 18th, Tuesday, next night they play Columbus. Then they go to Columbus on the 20th. And then they play Winnipeg, who are still competitive, on the 22nd. And then they host San Jose on the 25th. And by then, the trade deadline will be over, and we'll have a much better idea of what's going on with the Flyers and what's going to be their team going forward. And of course, we have to be concerned about injuries, and because they always come up. We've mentioned a few tonight with some of the teams that are contending for that last playoff spot or the last couple playoff spots. So just a quick once around. Nolan Patrick coming back. Anthony.
Absolutely not.
Chef.
No, and I think it's detrimental to let them. At this point, it doesn't matter. Let them finish out and come back strong next year if that's the case.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I don't think so. When Fletcher gave his press conference, what 3-4 weeks ago now, whenever it was, he said, he's still going to come back this year. But with 30 games left, I mean, even if he gets cleared tomorrow, with 30 games left, you would have to go through, cleared for contact and probably a stint with the Phantoms to get his legs under him. And by the time he gets called up, I mean, the season's going to be over anyway. So I wouldn't even worry about it at this point. I think the best thing you can do is shut him down. I know they want to give him and all the fans hope, but at this point, it's just not worth it. Just shut him down for the year.
Yeah, I'll make it unanimous. I just don't see the point at this juncture of the season. And then he'd come up, and it wouldn't be like regular season hockey in October. The playoff push level hockey is a notch above, and it's just a notch below playoff hockey. So I don't think it's a good idea. I don't see it happening. I think the Flyers are going to try and improve themselves. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I know we have DB booked, Anthony, so we're going to try and work on see if Dave can make it. But we definitely will have Dennis Bernstein coming on with us on the 17th, and if the Flyers do make a move, we might have a special show about that. Okay, so just wrapping up, because we're going to have Anthony in this next segment. Just one thing. There is a player I think all of us really like. He has the personality and the skill set that we want him to be a Flyer. He's a Western Michigan University product, a second-round pick in 2016. His name is Wade Allison. It reminds me so much of Scott Hartnell. And he has 6 goals and 5 assists in his last 6 games. This is a guy who's been hurt a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him with Anthony, but he's on a hot streak right now. And, this is a guy the Flyers could sign after his season is up. And I don't think he's quite ready for the Flyers just yet, unlike Tanner Lazinski, another player that we're going to talk about, who could probably come right in and play. But I really like this guy. He might have a game like Mike Knuble. He's not going to be a great skater. He might not quite score as much as late season Mike Knuble, but he might be effective on the power play. So, late career Mike Knuble, but he might be effective on the power play, and we'll just have to see how that works out. So we're going to wrap it up from here. We should be back on the Monday the 17th. So before we go, we want to make sure everybody's contact info is covered. Chef, where can people catch you on Twitter?
You can get me on Twitter at Chef to the Left B. You can also find me at Steam Pub in Southampton, 606 2nd Street Pike. I'm there almost all the time, so stop by.
All right, Dan.
At Dan the Flyer Fan, at Brotherly Puck, at Brotherly_Pod, and at Angry Negative.
You got it. Catch all those shows at brotherlypuck.com and make sure you subscribe to us, the O&B Puckcast. Rate and review. We really appreciate it. Moves us up the charts. And, of course, there's no charge. And we close out from thefourthperiod.com. Anthony, let's get your info.
You can find me at ADeMarco25.
Fantastic. And, gents, we're going to turn it over to myself and my interview with Anthony Mingioni. And I hope everybody enjoys that. And until next time, take care. And yes, it's Isaiah back with you. I'm here with a return visitor, Anthony Mingioni from Centerized Philly Magazine. He's also the co-host of Off the Post Radio, and you can find him at centerizedphilly.com. Anthony, welcome back to the O&B Puckcast.
Pleasure to be back with you, Isaiah.
Yeah, wanted to talk to you about some Flyer prospects. There's a lot of articles right now and a lot of, with this break that the Flyers are having, a lot of prospect talk. And I know you have your own take and you have your own exposure to league executives, people with the team and people that follow the team. And just wanted to go through a couple names here. And sure. I'm going to start with Morgan Frost. From my perspective, I felt that he was brought along too soon. I understood the urgency, and the Flyers are short, of bodies, but I didn't think it really helped him that much, and I think he's back where he belongs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case. I don't think there's any question. In my opinion, I agree. It was definitely earlier than expected, but again, they decided, obviously, with the injury situation, that they want to at least get a look at him early on. And again, I thought he acquitted himself well early on in the stretch. But as time went on, we all saw that he was beginning to struggle to stay with the NHL pace. By the time we got sent back to Lehigh Valley, there was little question that he needed more ice time. He needed to really – the Phantoms are where he really needed to be this season in terms of his overall development as he adapts to the NHL. And again, the biggest thing I think we've all talked about with Morgan is the fact that, consistency is critical and that he has to use his best attribute. He thinks the game at a very quick pace, along with obviously his own foot speed. He has to, though, understand that you can't, unlike in juniors where he'd had moments where he could kind of lean onto his talent to kind of glide to help him through. I think in this circumstance, the fact he's learning now that he's got to bring it at his highest level every single night. And I think that's the thing that when he went back to the Phantoms, I think there was a little bit, probably a little bit of disappointment. But to his credit, of late, he has actually played particularly well for the Phantoms. The fact that he got an AHL All-Star appearance was interesting, considering the fact that he played that many games, a ton of games for the Phantoms this season. But that being said, he's getting 20 minutes a night, which is what he really needs as he develops, as he gets used to the rigors of playing at the pro level. He gets first power play unit time. And again, and I don't think necessarily that his time playing with the Flyers was a bad thing. The opportunity to see a player not too dissimilar in Claude Giroux and being able to play with him, I think is good for the memory banks more than anything, is that, right. He has that, he now knows what it's going to take.
Right, and that's kind of like some boxes that he can create in his own mind that he needs to check off.
Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. One thing is I was listening to Joel Farabee, his good buddy, and he said something that was kind of interesting that I thought was kind of pointed in that I'm used to, he said something like, I'm used to playing, and if I had a bad shift in college, I just went back out there. But at this level, and he's talking about the NHL, obviously, if I have a bad shift, I might not play another one. And I think the problem I had with the Morgan Frost promotion was that when players get into that mindset, they tend not to be as creative offensively and maybe not realize potential as soon as they could because they're trying to stay in the league and they're kind of risk averse.
I think there's something to be said for that, but also understanding the fact that you're jumping up ostensibly a level higher than what was originally expected of you going into the season. And that, when you're, it's like skipping, in some ways I equate it to skipping a grade of school. Yes, you have some advanced areas in your game, but there's other areas that I think go into where there's a maturity aspect that's involved. And again, to Joel Farabee's credit, I think playing probably a year of college hockey certainly helped, because you're probably in this, unlike Frost, he was playing against, a lot of cases players who were several years, in some cases several years older than he is.
Right, yeah.
Whereas Frost in this case is playing obviously with kids, with players in his own age group. So it's a little bit different. I think it's maybe a little bit more leeway sometimes when you have young wingers versus young centers, and you're asking Frost. Well, I think the Flyers really want to develop as a centerman. There's responsibilities that come with that, and his mindset and is as a playmaker. And he's always played center. He played wing, obviously, a little bit during developmental camp, saying, obviously, again, you want to try to make it to the NHL level. But I think the Flyers, knowing what goes into playing the pivot position in the NHL, requires a lot, and you have to get used to that load. And I do think there's something to what Joel is saying there in regards to realizing that if you make that little mistake, you may not play again, because there's other players that may fit into, in a given night, a better fit in the lineup, again, depending on who the opponent is. So you're always, if you're playing at the highest level, you're always going to be, as a young player in his first year, you're not going to be given the same level of leeway to make mistakes and to necessarily bring out that creativity, because you're specifically being asked to play in a lot of cases in a role, and you have to work yourself into that trust factor with your coaches. That will help basically for them to get to the point of saying, hey, I can trust him at the other end of the ice, and then I'm willing to sort of give you that leeway to say, okay, go out, be creative, but you better be, if you're going to, again, for me, it's always, if you are incredibly offensively gifted, you at a young age, you better be scoring on a consistent basis to counter the fact that your defensive game is not yet completely developed yet. And for younger players, more often than not, even if they're skilled like Farabee is, or Frost, you're going to still have those hiccups, and you're going to have other players who can fit into those roles, specific roles, quicker than maybe you can.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm just, the last thing on Morgan Frost, I think it behooves the Flyers to try and develop him as a center, especially in light of what's going on with Nolan Patrick. So I think that a little more caution with that player is definitely in order.
I would agree.
Yeah. Hey, let's move on to a couple of exciting young defensemen who are probably about 2-3 years away each. Let's start with Cam York. And he was recently at the World Junior Championships. He didn't get the amount of playing time that he and probably the Flyers thought he would. But even in a brief glimpse, he was impressive. And in college this year, he's been impressive as well when he has been healthy.
When he has been healthy. I think that also, in some ways also plays into why he didn't get quite as much opportunity at World Juniors, was because when you have an injury at the start of the season, you had a later startup, and he was kind of sort of getting into, and they wanted him on, I think they wanted him on the World Junior team, but I think in terms of the rigors of what's going to happen in terms of playing at that level, he still needs some physical growth, and in many ways, other prospect experts may, can certainly quibble this point with me or not. His physical stature and style of play, I think he may, to me, as I watch York, may project out to maybe a more offensively minded Peter Svoboda. In many ways, it's kind of where I'm kind of going with, where I think Cam York will project. I think he's going to have the chance to put up a lot more offensive numbers, but I'd like to see that defensive consciousness that Svoboda had in using his abilities to, anticipate, poke check, and I see some of those things in York's game. And again, in only 18 games this season, obviously he's currently standing at about 11 points and 4 goals. So there's some good things that are happening for him right now. But I think next year, again, we're going to see him have a regular shift on Team USA's World Junior roster, and we'll get an even better look at him. And obviously we're going to see it as the season progresses, as long as obviously he stays healthy. But I think York was a fine pick where they took him. And certainly there's been plenty of scuttlebutt back and forth as to whether or not the Flyers should have taken Cole Caulfield in the spot where they took York. There was plenty of discussion for that and will continue to be. But that being said, these are the things I like about York. He has to, I think, continue to grow defensively, and I think if he can pair out and look a little bit along those lines where he can put up more offensive numbers, but show, the really smart, heady defensive play that a guy like Peter Svoboda used to have, he's the guy I kind of look at with York in that respect.
Well, that would really be a good player. That's a solid 2-3 kind of defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, of course, he plays for University of Michigan, if you want to catch him on NCAA games. And he seems to do everything well. It's just physical maturity seems to be the one area, along with some of the attributes that you want him to acquire in terms of defensive awareness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's also talk about Igor Zamula. I think he's with the Calgary Hitmen until, of course, he was at the WJC, and among the Flyer entries in that tournament, he was the most impressive, but he had to go out because of back surgery. But from what we hear, it's not as bad as maybe we originally thought.
I know the quote, I think, from the Hitmen general manager, Jeff Chenoweth, was basically that they expected a 3 to 4 month recovery time. I think in many ways I don't want to say that certainly the Flyers were telling him to shut him down completely, but the hope is as we go along here, and I know the last bit that we heard of in that circumstance that they still kind of want them to be careful with the recovery. In some ways, it kind of reminds a little bit of the injury that happened to Phil Myers. The difference is obviously with Zamula is that I think he's probably, in terms of a defensive defenseman, maybe he has the chance to be even better than Myers. But I don't know if he necessarily at the NHL level is going to have the offensive potential that a Myers at Splash. And again, great. Even prior to World Juniors, he was already a point per game defenseman, 28 points in 28 games for the Hitmen. But he really, really came into his own overall in the World Juniors. And the fact that he did that with the injury that he had, really, in my mind, kind of cements Zamula as, again, I'm not ready to certainly to position him as, a top 2 defenseman in the NHL. That's way too far of a jump for me.
Right.
But I think I look at him as a second pair. You put him with a gifted offensive defenseman type, and Zamula with his size and range can make that into a really good secondary shutdown partnership. In terms of trying to figure out who Zamula kind of reminds me of, maybe not quite as although he's kind of lanky with a little bit of bulk to him, Braden Coburn in some ways. But again, we're going to obviously need to see where things go with Zamula. But there's things about him I really, really like. We saw him obviously again in developmental camp and was a revelation in developmental camp. So we'll see where things go with him, if he does play any more at this point in the season or at any point at the end of the season or the beginning of next. He certainly, I think, has earned, the benefit of the doubt when it came to getting that entry-level contract as quickly as he did.
There's no question, and it really helps if you miss on a pick. And to be able to get guys like Phil Myers and Igor Zamula, particularly with defensemen, where the Flyers struggled for years drafting these guys, it's a real bonanza to find a guy who should at least be an NHL contributor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to skip around a little bit. This is a prospect. I think he's playing in the NCAA at Western Michigan right now. He's had knee problems. Wade Allison. It just seems like he was born to be a Flyer. And he's had a lot of injuries, including a knee problem that he was only about 80% healthy in camp. But he's back, and it seems like he's kind of finally getting a groove going there.
Yeah, I believe has 11 points in 15 games. Again, there's a lot of things about Allison to like. His size and skill department, and also that intangibles. Again, he's got that sort of effervescent personality that can really kind of keep a room loose. So he's a guy that you look at and you say, he goes through all these injuries and everything, and you really want to root for him in terms of just trying to figure out a way to get to the NHL and be a productive player potentially. But I think, again, it's something that the Flyers are kind of holding their breath on with his injury history. Even though he knows, obviously, that he's been really bit as hard as any prospect I can remember in that area. And I'd love to see Allison, develop into, a legitimate power winger at the NHL level. It's tough to say that right now with the amount of the dings that he's taken.
Yeah, it is. You got to keep it real. He's got an uphill climb because of those injuries and the lack of development. One thing we don't worry about is physical maturity. It's just how he's going to take to the speed of the pro level if he can get there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about another power forward who this player is currently with the Ohio State Buckeyes, and his name is Tanner Laczynski, I think it's pronounced. And
yes, Tanner Laczynski.
Yeah, he seems like he's pro ready right now. He could have probably made the Phantoms with no problem, but he elected to go back. And what do you see in him and his prospects for the Flyers?
If it had been the previous administration, I think possibly that Laczynski, I'm not necessarily certain if they would have signed him. The feeling I'm getting right now is the fact that I think the Flyers, I think Fletcher said I know Chuck Fletcher said the organization's got a strong relationship with Laczynski, even though he did not take part in developmental camp last year because he was taking a summer course at OSU, and he wanted obviously to kind of be able to have that opportunity. I think the advantage of Tanner is the fact that he has the ability to. I think what attracts him to the Flyers is the fact that I think they see him as, if they think he can be a bottom six contributor, which is something they really need, he has a chance to figure into their plans. Whether it's going to be this season, I'm not sure. It all depends on how far along OSU goes with their schedule. He's able to play different positions, center and wing. I know it's been more wing for him in recent times, but I think the Flyer, there's also the possibility. I think he does have experience playing the pivot position, but I'll have to double check on that. But again, I think he's got an opportunity here, and I think the Flyers, do have a chance to sign him, but they're going to have to, if they're going to do it and have him in this year, they have to be prepared. They have to think that he is definitely a bottom six contributor, and that they're going to be willing to eat that first year of the ELC, I think, to get him to come to Philadelphia a little bit sooner to make that happen. Otherwise, I think, if he doesn't sign, I think there's going to be a lot of teams out there, if he does go to free agency, that are going to be interested in him.
No, I that's probably right. And, the one thing that has to give him hope is the Flyers have been open to playing rookies. They played 11 this year. And so young kids are getting a chance. I'm hoping if he sees that he feels like, hey, they really are going to give me a chance.
Exactly. And I think, again, the timing is probably good in that respect right now that the Flyers, I think if this was the previous administration, if it was Ron Exel's administration, they would be a bit more hesitant. They wouldn't guarantee that opportunity in time for him to come up immediately like that, because because Hextall's administration is very much slow cook everything, not until everybody is ready. And now, obviously, with the current administration under Fletcher, they're giving the young guys opportunities, but they're also having their bumps along the road along the way too. So, as we going back to obviously a Frost, a Farabee, in that circumstance. But if they think Laczynski, he's physically mature. I think he can probably physically handle the game, the rigors of playing at the NHL level. Probably in some ways, maybe even more than than Morgan Frost in this case, as Frost is continuing to develop, at least as of this year. And that's kind of where I'm at with Laczynski.
Yep. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Just a couple more, Anthony. Up at University of Minnesota, Duluth, is a left winger by the name of Noah Cates, who's been called kind of like a coach's dream as a 20-year-old. He's got 23 points in 24 games. What can you tell me about him and his pro prospects?
I will tell you, I know he's currently second on the team on UMD in scoring. And the thing is, he's had an opportunity. He's played, for obviously with Duluth with two back-to-back NCAA championships. We all know for a fact that he's one player in the system I think that everybody loves, and specifically Brent Fleur has mentioned that how much the Wild wanted him when the Flyers ended up taking him, because he was right in their backyard and they saw him all the time. The thing is, again, that he's a good 200-foot player. And UMD uses him in a lot of different circumstances. His brother, he also plays well, obviously, not only with his brother, but anybody who he kind of plays with. I think he kind of fits in, and he uses he plays the right way. I think is the best way to describe it. As general as that sounds,
right?
He is always, I think, making sure that he's back checking, that he's following the play, and I think he was certainly one of the better picks of the Hextall administration, that they identified him and took him where they did. But again, whether or not he's going to be putting up the offensive points in pros that he's done for UMD, it's probably too soon to say that. That being said, do I think he is in the future a potential very useful player, maybe as a middle? I think he tops out potentially as a middle sixer, probably close to the third line role in this case. But you never put it past. I'm not going to put anything past Cates to be able to come up to the NHL level and be a contributor once he hits in some manner once he gets his feet on the ice.
Yeah. He definitely looks like a player we're going to be excited about. Anthony, just wanted to also hit the goaltending position. There's so many players in and out of the professional and amateur ranks besides the ones we know with Carter Hart. And one that's intriguing a lot of people right now because he's playing pro hockey in North America. His name is Kirill Ustimenko. He's playing for the Reading Royals. And his numbers are pretty good in what's not necessarily a great situation. What have you heard?
I mean, actually, I think the Royals currently are second in their division right now. So actually, he's actually thrived. He's been one of the triggers, I think, and it's interesting because it's him and Felix Sandstrom, and in many ways, Ustimenko it has a leg up right now on Sandstrom in terms of his quality of play. I think his goals against, I believe, I got to check. I think it's 228. I may be wrong on that. I may be messing his number up with the other Russian goaltender that they have in the KHL, Fedotov. But his number is really his numbers are particularly good.
It's 2.56 there.
Yeah, 2.56. I was getting his numbers messed up with Fedotov. So in this circumstance, again, I think he has the chance. Again, I think they're going to slow play it, but I do think because the Phantoms right now with having both Alex Lyon and Jean-Francois Berube as their goaltending tandem, they're going to move on probably from Alex Lyon in the offseason. I got to check. I think if Berube's under a 1 or 2 year deal, so they're going to have at least one veteran. And at that point, probably going into next year, I think Ustimenko has a chance to be a part of that tandem for the Phantoms. And again, they're going to take things a step. I think they're going to take things very much a step at a time. He's only 20 years of age. I think with a goalie like Hart, it was a rare circumstance. Who again, in terms of the kind of player that Hart is and the kind of mindset that he has, but I got to give Ustimenko a lot of credit for making the jump from Russian juniors straight up to the North American pro ranks. And that, again, I think he has done particularly well in Reading. He is their starting goaltender there. And I think, he's going to have that gradual come up. He's starting off in the ECHL. Next year he would project out to try to see if he can challenge for the starting job at the Phantoms. He'll get a decent amount of ice time. And then the following year, you're looking at his age 22, 23 season. You're looking at then a second, third, fourth year. Goalies, normally, especially ones that were coming over from Europe, they take a few years to get used to playing on North American ice. Some are faster than others, but I think within 2 years or so, you could very well, if Ustimenko keeps on this track, he has a chance, I think, of knocking on the door as the Flyers back up the Hart.
Yeah, well, old guys like myself look forward to the Lindbergh-Froese era all over again. We could actually have a couple guys we can count on. Yeah, you're right. The Reading Royals right now are like just statistical, practically tied for second place, and I got to keep up with my ECHL standings. Before we go, Ed, I just wanted to get your quick take as we turn to the Flyers and their playoff prospects moving forward with these games left. I think there's 34 left. Boy, they're really bunched together in a lot of tough games, but at least they play teams in their own conference and their own division.
They do, and again, the heady travel for them, it pretty much now is going to lighten up in that respect. They're going to have a lot of games, but it's for them. It's been the travel miles that they've pounded on this year. in addition to the back-to-back situation. It's been a lot. And they're, as of right now, I'd say, if they kind of maintain the pace that they had prior to the All-Star break, I think the Flyers stand a pretty good chance of not just being necessarily in the wild card position, but potentially challenging. And everything is such an ebb and flow, and you got 3-point games everywhere, in the division, and that kind of makes it a little tougher to project how much progress you're going to make in the standings. But I do think, and again, they got some tough ones coming up. Certainly, Colorado this weekend is going to be a tall order for them. But I think with more home games coming up, with the lessening of travel, that I think portends well for them. I'm holding to the fact that I think Philadelphia is going to be playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs this season. The question for me, again, unless they completely just fall apart and things just don't go the way they're hoping that it's going to go, I think, in my mind, again, we'll see where things are going to be at the deadline on how they need to augment their roster. I know a lot of people are pointing to adding a winger to replace somewhat of what they've lost, with obviously Oscar Lindblom being, obviously not playing. But I also think pivot has to be an NHL pivot has to also be preferably a third line center type if they can.
Right.
And then obviously I think defense is another area that they have to look at as well, because I do think there's a bit of while they've got some talent on that blue line, an injury or two could potentially make things difficult for them in terms of their depth if they have to kind of go into the system and figure out who they're going to have. And again, losing Sam Morin obviously to his injury took away a lot from their depth, and they still obviously don't have Shane Gostisbehere. That's another area of depth that comes a bit of concern. That said, I will say Mark Friedman impressed me with his time up here with the Flyers, and that's a right shot. Now he's not tall in stature, but he's built like a bowling ball. He's tough. He's strong. He'll bounce off of hits. He'll deliver some of his own. I feel fairly confident that if Friedman that if they call Friedman up again, that he can certainly handle, I think, a third pairing situation for the Flyers.
Yeah. And would you say that when you look at the defense, that mobility is somewhat of a question?
There's some definite mobility issues, although I think, again, guys like Myers are mobile. I think it's just there's guys still kind of having to learn when they can jump in, when they have to drop back on plays, like a Myers in this case. Certainly, if you get Shane Gostisbehere back and you get a Gostisbehere who's closer to, his better play than he has of late, then that takes away, I think, some of the mobility questions, because then you're going to have a defenseman who can do that for you. But he's got to get back to what he was once he comes back from injury for that to occur.
Yeah. Last one, and on a scale of 1 to 10, chances that the Flyers actually do make some kind of deal that addresses some of the aforementioned needs.
I'm gonna, at this point, again, with cap circumstances and everything else right now, that they're being closed. The thing is, you have to get some salary matching going there, and that's not necessarily easy. Which is why, under other circumstances, I would probably be closer to an 8 potentially, but in this circumstance, I'm more in the 6 to 7 range right now on a trade. If there's something that's open and available, I do think Chuck Fletcher will take that opportunity and explore it. But they do have to be careful with regards to, again, giving it, because you have to probably look at you're looking at potentially a roster player and something else in order to gain an upgrade of some kind in those areas.
Yep, gotcha. Anthony, thanks so much for doing this, and hopefully you can do it again down the road.
My pleasure, Isaiah. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Right, bye.